I am not a runner. I mean, let me just let me just get it out there as quick as I possibly can. I'm not a runner. I've tried. In the past, I really have. I mean, and I would go out there and I would even make sure I had the right shoes, and then I would start running, and literally within like one half of a mile, I'm like, what am I doing? Is this over yet? Running around a track is even more frustrating for me because I'm like, I feel like I'm literally going nowhere. I'm not a runner. I never have been. And frankly, I don't think I ever will be. Oh, get me on a bicycle, that's different. My wife, definitely a runner. And man, as a family, we rallied around my wife a couple of years ago because she decided she's going to run a half marathon, which is no small feat. So we watched her rehearse and rehearse. We watched her the race itself, mentally, physically. We watched her build up incrementally. First starting just a mile or two, then 3, and then you constantly doing 3 for a while, then a 7-mile run, and then finally we got to game day. The day where she was going to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and then run 13.1 miles. And as a family, we got to various parts on the different course, and we had our signs, and we were cheering for her, encouraging her. And one time I recognized something. They came up to these little stations, and they're spaced throughout the entire race. These tents, and inside the tent, each of the runner would go, and they would at times even keep running, but they would grab something, a thing or two, they would put it in their mouth, and they would keep going. And I thought, what is that? Come to find out, they're called hydration stations. They're actual stations where you go in the middle of the race to refuel, to give you what you need in order to finish the race strong. The reason why I'm talking about running is not to be an exercise advocate, although I think exercise is good. The reason why this week I'm talking about running is because it seems to be one of Paul's major metaphors for the Christian life, for persisting in this journey of Jesus, for moving as quick as we can, as patient as we can, as powerful as we can, to the finish line, which is Jesus himself. As a matter of fact, one of those passages is 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7. He says, I have fought the good fight, using a metaphor of actual fighting. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness. He's using Olympic metaphor. These contests in which you would either fight or which you would either run in order to actually gain the crown. But he's using it to describe our journey of faith. It's the same thing he does in Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 1 talks about the great cloud of witnesses that is surrounding us. And then he says this, so let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And then he says, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us run with perseverance. This race marked out for us, this journey of faith. This week, I definitely want to give you that exhortation. If you are sidelined, if you are not in the middle of the race, for whatever reason, maybe it's because you had a diagnosis that knocked you off your feet. Maybe it's because you've been straining for the heart of a child, and persistently the child has been in rebellion. Maybe it's because your marriage is struggling and you simply don't know which way to go. I don't know why it is that at times we sideline. But if you are not on the path of the race, my exhortation for you this week is get back in the race. But as you're running, and this is my real point for the week, as you're running, make sure you are stopping at the hydration stations and giving yourself the fuel to finish the race well. A couple years ago, I noticed I had a cycle that every single semester, especially in the fall, I would get going, and then by around Thanksgiving, I would be crashing. And usually whenever I crash, I hunker down. I start to wall everybody off. I start to wall everything off. Everything becomes an interruption to my to my to my hunkering down. And I noticed something. A couple of years ago, I felt the Lord saying this: Shane, you are running the race strong. But the problem is, in the middle of the race, instead of stopping at the hydration stations, you grab a Pepsi and you grab a Snickers bar and you begin to chug and you begin to chomp. Listen, there's nothing wrong with having a soda. That's not what I'm saying. And there's nothing wrong with having a Snickers bar. I'm not saying that this is a whole message on watching your calories. What I'm saying is this: if you're in the middle of a marathon and you start chugging a soda, you might make it to the finish line, but it is going to be deeply painful. So I sat down and I asked myself this question: what are the things that spiritually hydrate me? What are the things that on this journey of faith, on this great race that we have begun in Jesus, what are the things that actually give me energy, that actually sustain me as I'm moving towards the finish line? And I came up with 6 things for myself. Everybody's list will be different. This is my list. Number 1, I realized I am at my best when I am reading. I mean, you guys have seen the books on my shelves, and it's funny because students at times will walk in and they'll be like, have you read every one of these books? And my response is always the same: well, not in a day. I've been doing this for 20 years. I would hope that I've read a couple. But I've noticed that if I am not reading on a consistent basis and even finishing books, I begin to struggle. Whenever I am reading on a consistent basis, it hydrates me. It is the Gatorade. It is the water that in the middle of a marathon I need to keep going to the finish line. The second thing is, if I am not consistently praying, and the prayers might look very different, whether it is I'm speaking, or whether it is I'm journaling, or whether it is I'm just sitting in a contemplative state asking for the Lord to interact with me, if I'm not consistently opening myself up to the Lord, I begin to struggle. I also noticed I need to be exercising. If I'm not exercising, playing basketball, or riding my bike, or doing something, I notice that in the times when stress comes, I begin to struggle. I've also noticed one-on-one time with my wife or my kids. When I have that as a part of my consistent diet, no matter how tough things get, it energizes me. It hydrates me. I've also noticed if I'm doing house projects, that's number 5. House projects. If I'm accomplishing something around the house, it energizes me. And then number 6, I also noticed if I limit my electronic intake, the amount of time I'm on my phone or staring at a TV, if I limit it, I'm hydrated. And in the times whenever life is most stressful, in the times whenever the journey begins to be the most difficult, we need to hydrate ourselves with the things that brings us life, not with things that make finishing the journey all the more difficult. So my challenge for you this week is this: if you are struggling to get back on the course, jump back on the race. Jump back in. We need you. But those of you that have been running the race, and maybe for a long time, sit down and ask yourself the question: when I am at my best, what am I doing? And just allow the Spirit to bring to surface, to unearth whatever it is that the Spirit uses to hydrate you. Everybody's list will be different, but everyone needs hydration in the middle of a race. So let's run the good race, staying hydrated, so that as Christians we can continue to advance the kingdom of God as we run on the journey to the finish line of Jesus himself. I love you guys. I'll talk to you next week.